They threw the wild alien girl into a human cell for fun. They returned to her licking his feet. The sterile metallic clang of a baton against cell bars echoed down cell block D. Jonnel did not look up from his cot. Looking up was a sign of engagement. And engagement meant trouble. Here in the Xylos prison station, trouble was a currency the guards spent with gleeful abandon. He was prisoner 1138, the soft human. His softness, however, was a deception. He was a xeno-behaviorist, and his crime was not simple study. His crime was success. He had been captured for compiling a complete behavioral profile of the Kyrani, a predatory pack-based race the Xylos used as terrified, barely controllable shock troops. It was forbidden to understand them. The Xylos preferred their monsters to be mindless. Jonnel's quiet, observant nature wasn't weakness. It was the very tool of his crime. "Get the high-voltage pikes," a guttural voice barked. Warden Krell. His voice was like gravel in a grinder. "This one's a true beast." A different sound cut through the air, a high-pitched, feral scream of pure, undiluted rage. It was followed by the thump of a body hitting a wall and a Xylos curse. Jonnel finally lifted his head, his gray eyes narrowing. They were dragging someone down the corridor. "She's taken a chunk out of Rill's armor," another guard laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. "He'll be scrubbing her saliva off for a week." Hold her there," Krell commanded. The procession stopped outside Jonnel's cell. He stood slowly, his bare feet pressing against the cold floor. Through the energy barrier, he saw her. She was Kyrani, unmistakable. She was magnificent and terrifying, taller than him by a head, with a body of coiled, lean muscle. Her skin was a vibrant, startling green. A wild mane of silver-gray hair was matted with grime. 2 large pointed ears, covered in soft teal-green fur, were pinned flat against her skull in fury. A long, matching bushy tail the color of a deep ocean thrashed behind her. Her face was sharp, almost feline, and her dark eyes were wide with panic and aggression. "This one's broken," Krell sneered, mostly to himself. "Too feral. Broke 2 of my best handlers. We were scheduled to space her." He then looked at Jonnel, and a thin, cruel smirk spread across his face. "But why waste the spectacle? Let's give the human expert a practical exam. Open 1138. The guard at the console hesitated. "Sir, with the human, the betting pool only gave him 3 minutes. "That's the point, idiot," Krell snapped. "He thinks he understands the beasts. Let's see him prove it. Activate the pikes and throw her in." The energy barrier sizzled and dropped. 2 guards, bracing themselves, jabbed the Kyrani woman with the pikes. She roared as the electricity hit her, a pained, guttural sound. With a final coordinated shove, they hurled her into the cell. She stumbled, crashing against the far wall before spinning around. The barrier snapped back into place, sealing them in. Velora, as her species file would have named her, was a hurricane of claws and teeth. She bared black nails that looked like talons and hissed, her entire body trembling. The guards were laughing outside, their dark shapes distorted by the energy field. 5 credits, says she has his eyes out in the first minute. She lunged. It was not a feint. It was a kill strike, a blur of green and silver aimed directly at his throat. Jonnel did not raise his hands. He did not brace for impact. He did not try to run. He moved. He executed, perfectly, the gesture of absolute surrender he had theorized in his research, a gesture that, if his data was correct, no Kyrani had ever seen from an enemy. In one smooth, deliberate motion, he dropped to his right knee, bowing his head and turning it to the side, fully exposing the pale, vulnerable line of his neck. Simultaneously, he reached for the single nutrient-paced ration bar on his cot and extended it, palm up, in his left hand. He made himself small, he made himself harmless, he offered food, he offered surrender. Velora's lunge was a masterpiece of predatory grace, and her stop was even more so. She skidded on the metal floor, her claws screeching, kicking up sparks. She was a mere inch from his exposed neck, her chest heaving. Hot, panting breaths washed over his skin. He could smell her, a sharp, feral scent of sweat, fear, and something uniquely alien like charged air and dust. He did not move. He kept his eyes averted, his neck bared, his hand steady. Her predatory script, the instinctual drive to neutralize a threat, had just collided with a response so counterintuitive it had no file. He was not prey. He was not threat. He was other. She stared at his neck, her dark eyes wide. She heard the guard's laughter. She saw the ration bar. She sniffed the air, then, with agonizing slowness, sniffed his throat. He remained perfectly, terrifyingly still. Her mind, fractured by rage and panic, seized on the one stable, undeniable thing in the room. This small, soft-skinned creature was not fighting. He was yielding. And in her primal world, there was a protocol for that. The laughter outside died, replaced by confused silence. Warden Krell moved closer to the barrier, his smirk gone. What is it doing? Jonnel slowly, very slowly, lowered his hand with the ration bar to the floor and slid it forward. Velora's eyes tracked it, but she did not take it. Instead, she lowered her head. Her silver hair brushed against his jaw, and then her tongue, warm and impossibly rough like serrated velvet, touched his skin. She licked him, once, a short testing flick against his pulse. Jonnel's breath hitched, but he did not pull away. She made a low sound in her throat, a rumble that was almost a purr. Then, to the utter, dumbfounded horror of the Xylos guards, Velora dropped to her knees. She bowed her head, her silver mane pooling on the floor. She nudged his bare left foot with her nose and then began to lick. It was not a frenzied act. It was slow, methodical, reverent. She started at his ankle, her rough tongue meticulously cleaning the grime from his skin, moving with deliberate strokes over his instep, and then, with a shocking intimacy, taking his big toe into her mouth, cleaning it with the care a mother would show her cub. Jonnel sat on his cot, his hands still frozen in midair. Outside, the Xylos guards were silent. The bets were off. The world had just tilted on its axis. "Close the viewport," Krell snapped, his voice tight with a new unfamiliar emotion. "Humiliation. Now!" The metal shutter slammed down, plunging the cell back into its dim, quiet light. It left Jonnel alone with the wild alien girl, her teal-furred ears now relaxed, as she continued to perform the deepest Kyrani gesture of fealty, accepting her new, undisputed alpha. The heavy thud of the viewport closing seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence of the cell. All Jonnel could hear was the rasping, wet sound of Velora's tongue against his skin and the frantic hammering of his own heart. He looked down at the top of her head, at the intricate cascade of silver-gray hair, at the soft teal ears that swiveled slightly, listening. She was calm. The trembling rage was gone. The animalistic panic had evaporated. Her entire body, which had been a coiled spring of lethal intent, was now relaxed, settled on her haunches before him in a posture of complete vulnerable deference. She finished with his left foot and, without looking up, shifted to his right, her movements fluid and practiced. Jonnel let out a breath. His mind, the behaviorist's mind, was racing. It worked. Gesture 3 alpha, calculated surrender, broke the aggression loop. She's recategorized me. Not threat, not prey, dominant. An alpha who establishes rank through non-aggression. This, his theory, confirmed in the most terrifying way possible. Her tongue was surprisingly warm. A sharp sizzle and the energy barrier at the front of his cell snapped off. Jonnel's head shot up. The physical door slid open with a hiss, revealing Warden Krell, his face a mask of cold fury. He was flanked by 2 guards, not the ones from before, but larger, clad in heavier tactical armor. They held shock pikes, and they were powered on, blue light crackling at the tips. "Experiment over, beast," Krell spat. "Get off the floor and come." He never finished the sentence. The sound Velora made was not human. It was a low, guttural, chest-deep growl that vibrated the very air in the cell. In less than a second, she went from a posture of total submission to one of absolute defense. She was on her feet, a green and silver blur, placing her body directly between Jonnel and the doorway. Her dark eyes, moments before soft and focused, were now black pits of promising violence. Her lips peeled back from her teeth, revealing sharp, white felines. Her teal tail bushed out, rigid. She was taller than the guards, her head lowered, her shoulders bunched. She was a living wall of protective rage. The guards, for all their armor, instinctively took a step back. "I said move," Krell ordered, his hand dropping to the sidearm at his hip. "Get her," one of the guards yelled, thrusting his pike forward. Velora was faster. She didn't just dodge the pike, she attacked it. She slapped the crackling end away with one hand, her black claws screeching against the metal alloy. With her other hand, she grabbed the guard's wrist. The sound of high-density Xylos armor creaking under the pressure of her grip filled the corridor. The guard roared in pain and surprise. She ripped the pike from his grasp and threw him bodily out into the hallway, where he crashed into the far wall. The second guard lunged. Velora met him head-on. She was not a brawler, she was a predator. She ducked under his swing, her claws flashing. Deep, parallel gouges appeared in the guard's chest plate. She slammed the heel of her hand into his helmet, the impact snapping his head back, and then kicked his knee. The joint buckled with an audible crack. He went down, howling. It had taken 4 seconds. Krell had his weapon drawn, but he didn't fire. He was staring, his face pale, his best men down, and the beast was standing over them, her chest heaving, her green skin slick with sweat. Then she slowly backed into the cell, her eyes never leaving Krell until her back bumped against Jonnel's legs. She stayed there, a living shield. Jonnel, his heart pounding, slowly placed a hand on her shoulder. Her skin was hot, her muscles tight as steel cables. "It's okay," he said, his voice quiet. At his touch, the growl in her chest subsided just slightly. She glanced back at him, a quick, questioning look. Krell looked from Jonnel to Velora to his wounded men. His mind was working. This wasn't just humiliation. This was a threat. The human, the soft prisoner, had done what his entire military apparatus could not. He hadn't just tamed the untamable asset, he had bonded her. He had a weapon the Xylos could not control. He couldn't let this stand. He couldn't let a human possess this power. "Seal the cell," Krell bit out, his voice dripping with venom. He holstered his weapon. "Seal it now!" The door hissed shut. The energy barrier snapped back on. Krell stared at them through the field for one long, hateful moment. He looked at Jonnel, and his eyes promised murder. Then he turned and stalked away, his men dragging their groaning comrade with them. Silence returned. Velora's adrenaline faded. The tension left her body in a sudden rush, and she sagged against Jonnel's legs, her breathing heavy. He slid off the cot to sit on the floor, his back against the wall. She studied him, her head tilted, those dark eyes full of a new, intense focus. She reached out and with one sharp claw, very gently, very deliberately, hooked the collar of his prisoner's shirt and tugged him closer. Then she nudged his hand with her head, rubbing her teal-furred ear against his palm, a clear scent-marking gesture. Mine. She turned, surveyed the cell, and made a decision. She walked to the foot of Jonnel's cot, nudged the thin, dirty mattress aside with her head, and curled up on the cold, bare metal floor. She wrapped her long, bushy tail around her nose, her body facing the door. His new, terrifyingly effective guard. Days began to blur, marked only by the automated brightening and dimming of the cell's single light panel. The prison routine, however, was shattered. Jonnel was no longer just prisoner 1138. He was, to the rest of Cell Block D, the Beastmaster. The Xylos guards left them utterly alone. No one approached the cell. No one spoke. They just watched. The most significant change was the mess hall. The first time the doors hissed open for the meal cycle, Jonnel tensed. Velora was instantly on her feet, a low growl in her chest. "It's food," Jonnel said, pointing to himself and then miming eating. "Food, we go." She seemed to understand. She stalked out of the cell, not ahead of him, but not behind. She was at his left, her shoulder almost brushing his arm, her eyes scanning every other prisoner, her tail lashing slowly. It was a clear, calculated display of escort. The mess hall fell silent when they entered. Prisoners, Xylos, rodent-like creature, and a few massive, rocky-skinned Gorl all averted their gaze. Velora led him to the dispensary line, her presence parting the crowd like a ship's bow through water. Jonnel took his tray of nutrient paste and protein cubes. Velora took hers. They sat at an isolated table. Before Jonnel could even lift his spork, Velora was sniffing his tray. She nudged his protein cubes, sniffed her own, and then with lightning speed snatched the cubes from her tray and dumped them onto his. She pushed his tray closer to him. Then she took one of his cubes, sniffed it, and began to eat. She had given him the better portion. She was providing for him, the alpha. Back in the cell, their nonverbal language blossomed. The space was too small for secrets. He learned her rhythms. She learned his. When he slept, she was a vigilant shadow at the foot of his bed. When he paced, her eyes followed him. Later that cycle, he noticed her crouched in the corner, her back to the camera, seemingly asleep. But he saw her hand move. She was slipping one of the protein cubes she had taken from her own tray into a small crack in the wall panel. He filed the observation away. Hoarding? Or something else? The true intimacy began on the third day. Jonnel was sitting on his cot, examining a nasty scrape on his forearm from when Velora had first been thrown into the cell. It was red and inflamed. She saw it. She approached him slowly, making a low, inquisitive sound in her throat. She nudged his arm with her nose, sniffing the wound. "It's nothing," he murmured. "Just a scratch." She ignored his words. She took his forearm in her hands, her grip surprisingly gentle, her black claws carefully retracted. She lowered her head, and her rough, warm tongue licked a clean stripe up the wound. It stung, a sharp, antiseptic jolt. He tried to pull back, but her grip tightened. "Velora," he began. She growled, a soft, chiding sound. "Stay still." She licked it again methodically, her serrated tongue cleaning the wound with a shocking efficiency. Kyrani saliva, his research noted, was a powerful antiseptic. When she was satisfied it was clean, she kept his arm, her gaze softening. She began to groom him. Her tongue licked his hand, cleaning the grime from under his nails. She moved to his wrist, her tongue rasping over his skin, and he felt an involuntary shiver run up his spine. It was not sexual. It was primal. It was possession. It was care. Her silver hair brushed his face as she focused, her teal ears twitching with concentration. She finished his hand and looked up, as if expecting something. Jonnel, his throat dry, slowly raised his own hand. He hesitated, then very gently rested it on top of her head. Her hair was thick, surprisingly soft beneath the layer of grime. She closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, a deep vibrating sound starting in her chest. A purr. The sound rumbled through his hand, up his arm, settling deep in his own chest. He stroked her hair, then, testing a hypothesis from his research, he tentatively touched one of her large teal ears. The fur was like plush velvet. She gasped softly, and her purr doubled in volume, her whole body vibrating. He rubbed the base of her ear with his thumb. Bingo. A primary social bonding zone. She melted, her head dropping into his lap, her eyes squeezed shut in bliss. "This is okay," he whispered. She responded by purring louder. He needed to break the silence. He needed to know her. He touched his own chest. "Jonnel," he said clearly. "Jonnel." She opened one dark eye, the purr stuttering. She looked at his mouth, then at his chest. He pointed at her, his hand still stroking her ear. Who are you?" She watched his lips. Her own mouth moved, trying to form the shape. A low guttural growl emerged. "Jonnel," he repeated. She tried again. "Jonnel." It was close enough. He smiled, a real smile, the first in months. He pointed at her. "And you?" She sat up, her expression serious. She tapped her own chest, her sharp claws clicking against the thin fabric of her shift. Her voice was rough, a low alto growl, but it was clear. "Velora." He let out a breath. "Velora." She pointed at him, her gaze sharp and possessive, and this time she said his name perfectly. "Jonnel." The naming was a key. It unlocked a new layer of their dynamic. She was still his shadow, his protector, his provider, but now there was a person inside the beast. She was intelligent, fiercely so, and a rapid learner. He taught her food, water, sleep, guard. She taught him the Kyrani growls for danger, mine, and wait. But their deepest connection remained nonverbal. It was built on scent and touch. The prison was a place of sensory deprivation, cold metal, recycled air, the acrid sting of the energy barriers, and the chemical tang of the nutrient paste. To Velora, with her heightened Kyrani senses, it must have been a sterile hell. Jonnel, he learned, was her only comfort. He was sitting against the wall, meditating, trying to find a quiet place in his own mind. He felt her approach. She didn't sit, but knelt beside him, her head tilted. She was sniffing him. Not his skin, but his clothes. She leaned in, her nose brushing the worn fabric of his gray prisoner trousers. She inhaled deeply, her eyes closing. "What is it?" he murmured, opening his eyes. She didn't answer in words. She moved closer, pressing her face into the crook of his neck, right against his pulse. She breathed him in. He could feel the soft flare of her nostrils against his skin. He was human. He was organic. He smelled of sweat, of skin, of life, a complex biological scent that was a stark contrast to the sterile world around them. To her, He was an anchor. She made a low, content sound and stayed there, her silver hair spilling over his shoulder, her teal tail wrapping around his ankle. He sat perfectly still, his body rigid. This level of intimacy was overwhelming. It was more possessive than any human kiss. She was imprinting on him, marking his scent as hers, as safe. He found himself reacting. He slowly lifted his hand and rested it on her back. He could feel the individual vertebrae, the shift of the powerful muscles under her green skin. He began to stroke her back, a long, slow motion. Her purr started, a low vibration against his neck. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her dark, feline eyes were half-lidded, her pupils blown wide. She looked drugged, blissful. She licked his jaw, her rough tongue scraping against his stubble, and the shiver it sent through him was undeniable. It was raw, suggestive, and completely primal. He found himself stroking her ears again, knowing the effect it had. He rubbed the soft teal fur between his thumb and forefinger, and she arched into his touch, her breath hitching. "You like that," he stated, his voice huskier than he intended. Her answer was to push his hand harder against her ear, a silent, demanding request for more. A sudden, harsh clang echoed down the corridor, a guard banging his baton on a railing just because he could. Velora was on her feet before the echo died. She was at the barrier in an instant, her body in a low crouch, a feral snarl ripping from her throat. The pet was gone, and the predator was back. Her tail lashed, her claws fully extended. "Velora," Jonnel said, his voice sharp. "Stand down, no danger." She glanced back, her eyes still wild, her chest heaving. "No danger," he repeated, standing up and walking to her. He put his hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, just noise." She kept growling, her focus locked on the corridor, where the guard's footsteps were now retreating. She was a taut wire of defensive energy. She would not calm down. The intimacy was shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of their cage. He needed to ground her. He did the only thing he could think of. He pulled her away from the barrier, sat her down on the cot, and then took her face in his hands. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice low. She fought his grip for a second, her instincts screaming at her to watch the door, but his atypical alpha command, a quiet, direct order, won. Her eyes locked on his. "You're safe," he said. "I'm safe. No danger." She was still vibrating, her body a coiled weapon. She pressed her face into his shirt, a desperate, almost violent gesture. She inhaled his scent, her hands gripping his arms, her claws pricking his skin even through the fabric. Grounding. She was using his scent to pull herself back from the brink, to find the safe place in the middle of the threat. He held her, his arms wrapping around her, stroking her silver hair until the trembling stopped, and the low growl in her chest finally faded to a ragged purr. He realized with a sudden, dawning clarity that this bond was now unbreakable. And he was just as addicted to her presence, her strange, fierce, possessive care, as she was to his scent. Their routine became a silent shared life, he the quiet center, she the feral orbit. But Jonnel was a scientist, he observed, and he was noticing inconsistencies. Her hoarding of the protein cube, her almost calculated displays of wildness when she knew the guards were watching the monitors, and her behavior in the recreation yard, a larger, sterile room with a grated roof open to the station's grimy upper levels. Her eyes weren't on the guards. They were on the infrastructure. She stared at ventilation shafts. She watched power conduits. She tracked the path of a maintenance drone with an intensity that was not feral, but calculating. Her wildness, he began to suspect, was a mask, a brilliant, perfect mask. His submission in the cell hadn't just tamed her, it had proven something to her. He had passed a test. He decided to test his theory. Back in the cell, he waited until the light panel dimmed for the sleep cycle. The single security camera in the corner was old, its low-light resolution grainy at best. He sat on the floor, his back to it. Velora, as always, curled up at his feet. "Velora," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Her head lifted, her teal ears flicking forward. He picked up a small, jagged piece of metal he'd broken off his cot frame weeks ago. On the floor, in the grime, he drew a crude stick figure. "Jonnel," he whispered, pointing to it. Then he drew a taller, more fluid figure next to it, adding pointed ears and a tail. "Velora." She watched, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light. She nodded, she understood. His hand trembled just once. He took a breath. He drew 2 small stick figures next to Velora. Very small. He looked at her, his expression a question. Her breath hitched. It was a tiny sound, almost imperceptible, but it was all the confirmation he needed. The feral mask dissolved. The being looking back at him was not a wild animal. It was a person. A person with a cold, desperate, and terrifying intelligence in her eyes. The alpha dynamic was real, her instincts were real, but beneath it was a plan. She grabbed his wrist. Her grip was iron, her sharp nail pressed into his skin, not to hurt but to focus him. She took the metal shard from his hand. Her movements were quick, economical. She added to his drawing. She sketched a layout. It was not a perfect schematic, but it was a map of tunnels, of vents, of junctions. It was the maintenance conduit system. She pointed to a specific spot on her map, a small junction box. Then she pointed to the 2 small figures. She looked at him, her face a mask of agonizing, controlled pain. She spoke one word, a word he had not taught her, a word that was raw, guttural, and ripped from the deepest part of her. Cubs. Jonnel's blood ran cold. Cubs, not children. Cubs, young, helpless. He looked at the crack in the wall where she hid her food. It wasn't hoarding, it was smuggling. You've been feeding them. She nodded, her jaw tight. She was a matriarch. She'd stashed her young in the station's guts, and her feral act was a desperate, brilliant ploy to be underestimated, to be thrown in a low-security cell, to find a way back to them. His submission in the cell, it wasn't just a subversion of her aggression, it was a revelation. She, a creature of pure primal strength, had seen his strength, the quiet, calculating non-aggression, the cunning, the human trait. She had recognized him as a different kind of alpha, one who didn't fight, he thought, and he was exactly what she needed. He had not tamed her, she had recruited him. Where? He whispered. She tapped the map. She tapped the wall of their cell, pointing up. They were close. We get them, Jonnel said. It wasn't a question. It was a vow. Velora stared at him, her dark eyes searching his. Then she did something that shattered him. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on her green cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. A true Kyrani gesture, he now knew. Not of submission, but of equals, of pack. Everything changed. The quiet, sensual rhythm of their cell life was replaced by a new focused tension. The mask was still there. For the camera, for the guards, she was the feral pet. But when the lights were low, they were partners. He was no longer just her alpha. He was her strategist. Her map was their starting point. Jonnel, the behaviorist, applied his skills to the prison itself. He watched the guards, but now he was memorizing patrol times. He noted the precise second the energy barrier flickered during the nightly power cycle. He listened to the groan of the waste recycling unit 2 levels below. That's it, he whispered one night, tapping the wall. The recycling unit. When it fires up, the power in this section fluctuates. He pointed to the main conduit panel near the door, then up to the grimy ventilation grill near the ceiling. If we short that specific conduit, he pointed to the panel, it will fry the power grid for the entire cell block. The emergency lockdowns will fail, and this whole sector will go dark. Velora's eyes followed his finger to the vent. The lock, she whispered. It was mag-locked. The mag-lock on that vent will de-energize, he finished. It will be our only way out. She looked at the panel, then at the vent. She nodded. She could get the grill off. He was the when and the how. She was the what. The plan formed. It was desperate. It was by any sane measure impossible. But it was a plan. The intimacy between them did not fade. It transmuted. It was no longer the curious, sensual exploration of 2 different species. It was the profound, desperate, and tactile bond of 2 people whose lives, and the lives of 2 cubs, depended entirely on each other. It became a silent promise in the dark. She was restless. The proximity to her cubs, the hope of escape, had her on a knife's edge. He found her one night pacing the cell, her tail lashing, a low growl of frustration in her chest. She was a caged matriarch, and her instincts were tearing her apart. He said softly. She stopped looking at him, her eyes wild. He sat on the floor and held out his hand. Come here. She hesitated, then knelt before him. He took her face in his hands. We will not fail, he said. He didn't know if it was true, but he said it. She stared at him, her green-skinned features taut with a raw, painful hope. She believed him. She leaned in, not to his neck this time, but to his mouth. She sniffed his lips, a curious, intimate gesture. Then she licked his bottom lip, a rough, warm, tasting flick. Jonnel's breath stopped. This was new. This was not grooming. This was not fealty. She licked him again, then pulled him down, off his cot, onto her own thin mattress on the floor. She pushed him back, her strength effortless. She loomed over him, her silver hair curtaining them, her body blocking the view of the camera. She lowered her head and pressed her ear to his chest, listening to his heart, a sound she had come to associate with her own safety. She licked his jaw, his neck, his collarbone. She was marking him, not as alpha, not as safe. She was marking him as her mate. It was a claiming. Her purr was a deep sexual rumble, a promise of her own. You are mine, you save my blood, you become my blood. He did not stop her. He put his hands in her hair, his fingers gripping the soft strands. The air in the cell grew thick and hot. She was all scent and sound and rough, warm touch. It was a sealing of their pact, a primal, suggestive, desperate act in the dark. A promise that if they lived, this was their future. If they died as a pack. She settled beside him, pulling his arm over her, curling into his side. For the first time she did not sleep at his feet. She slept in his arms, her body a warm, solid, living shield. The next day cycle, the atmosphere was wrong. The usual dull thrum of the prison was replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Jonnel felt it first, Velora felt it second. She was on her feet, sniffing the air, a low growl already building in her chest. "What?" Jonnel whispered, standing. "Krell," she hissed. The name was a curse on her tongue. The energy barrier didn't just sizzle off, it was cut. The heavy metal door slid open, revealing Warden Krell. He was not alone. He was flanked by 4 Xylos shock troopers, clad in black, full-body armor that was thicker than the standard guards. They carried heavy-pulse rifles, and at their hips were high-voltage shock pikes. Krell's face was a mask of smug satisfaction. He had been watching, he had seen the whispers, he had seen the intelligence in her eyes. The joke was over, the experiment was over, and he had finally tired of being the punchline. "Well, 1138, Krell said, his voice oily. "I must congratulate you. You've done the unthinkable. You've domesticated the feral." Jonnel stood in front of Velora, his body a laughably soft shield. "What do you want, Warden?" "What do I want?" Krell laughed. "I want to restore the natural order. This petting zoo is over. I've been reviewing the logs. She's a fascinating specimen, far too intelligent to be left with. You. The High Command Science Division will be thrilled to get her." He nodded to the troopers. "The specimen is being transferred for dissection. Sedate her. If the human interferes, put him down." Velora understood specimen. She understood dissection. She understood the threat. She moved, not in front of Jonnel, but beside him. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front. She was not growling. She was perfectly, terrifyingly silent. Her dark eyes were locked on Krell, and they were not the eyes of a feral beast. They were the cold, calculating eyes of a matriarch about to protect her territory. "Get the beast," Krell ordered, his smirk faltering slightly at her calm. The 4 troopers advanced, their pikes raised. They formed a semicircle, designed to trap her, to shock her from all sides. This was it. The plan wasn't ready, but the moment was here. It was now or never. Jonnel looked at Velora. She was watching the trooper on the far left. He was watching the one on the right. "Now, Velora!" Jonnel yelled, his voice cracking the silence. "The light, now!" It was the trigger. The troopers hesitated, confused by the sudden bizarre command. That hesitation was all Velora needed. She did not attack them. She attacked the cell. She lunged for the wall, her claws extended. She slammed into the main power conduit cover, the one Jonnel had identified. Her black claws hooked into the seams. With a raw, physical power that defied her lean frame, she tore the metal panel from the wall. Sparks and bright blue energy erupted. Jonnel was already moving. He had his thin, insulated prison blanket in one hand and the metal food tray in the other. As Velora ripped the panel free, he shoved the tray, wrapped in the blanket, deep into the exposed, sparking junction. The effect was instantaneous, a blinding white-blue flash, a sound like a thunderclap. Every light in the cell and in the entire cell block died. The hum of energy barriers, the thrum of the station, all gone. They were plunged into absolute chaotic darkness. The emergency lockdown protocols tried to engage, but Jonnel's sabotage had fried the entire grid for this sector. The cell door, stuck open, was their exit. A trooper screamed in the dark, "My optics are out! I can't see!" "Get her! Use your pikes!" Krell roared, his voice filled with sudden panic. A blue, crackling light sparked as a trooper activated his pike, illuminating the cell in strobing, terrifying flashes. He illuminated Velora, a green-skinned goddess of death, her silver hair flying, her eyes reflecting the light like a predator's. She was born for this. She moved. She grabbed the trooper's pike arm, used his body as a vault, and kicked the helmet of the man behind him. He went down. She ripped the pike from the first trooper's grasp and, in a fluid, brutal motion, slammed the butt of it into his throat. He collapsed, gurgling. She held the pike, its blue light crackling. "Jonnel, go!" she screamed, her voice a battle cry. Jonnel didn't need to be told. He grabbed the stunned, panicked Krell from behind, locking his arm around the warden's throat. He put his body between Krell and the door. "The vent!" he yelled back, his voice hoarse. "Get to the vent! I'll hold him!" Velora dispatched the third trooper with a kick that snapped his leg. The fourth scrambled backward, firing his rifle blindly. The pulse blast went wide, scorching the wall. Velora ignored him. She scaled the cell wall in 3 bounds, her claws finding purchase in the seams. She reached the vent grill. The one Jonnel had known would be de-energized. She tore it free, then looked down, the shock pike still in her hand. "Jonnel!" Jonnel shoved Krell with all his strength into the last, scrambling trooper. They went down in a heap of armor and curses. Jonnel leaped for the wall, his prisoner's boots slipping. He grabbed the edge of the vent. "Pull!" he yelled. A green hand, strong as steel, clamped onto his shirt and yanked. He was pulled bodily into the cramped, dark, and blessedly silent maintenance tunnel. Velora came right after him, dragging the 7-foot shock pike into the darkness with them. The darkness inside the conduit was absolute. It was not the dim light of the cell. It was a thick, oppressive black filled with the smell of dust, old wiring, and recycled air. Jonnel's heart felt like it was trying to escape his chest. He was clumsy, human, his eyes useless. "I can't see," he panted, his hand sliding on the smooth metal. "Do not see." Velora's voice came from just ahead, a low, calm rumble. "Listen." He heard it. The thump-thump of heavy, magnetic boots in the corridor below, the panicked, muffled shouts of guards. And then, a new sound, the high-pitched, terrifying wail of the station's main security alarm. Red, flashing emergency lights kicked on, but they were in the main corridors, not here. The tunnels were lit only by the faint crimson glow that bled through the seams. "Give me your hand," she ordered. He reached out, and her hand found his. Her skin was hot, her grip firm. She began to move, towing him, and he scrambled after her. She was moving in a low simian crouch, her body perfectly adapted to this environment. He stumbled, his knee hitting a junction box. "Quiet," she hissed, her voice sharp. She was also dragging the heavy pike, which scraped loudly. She growled in frustration. "I'm trying," he whispered back, his breath ragged. This was her world. He was the liability. She stopped. He bumped into her soft, bushy tail. She made a low, frustrated sound. Then she moved behind him. "Move," she commanded. "I will carry the pike." He crawled forward. She was hurting him. She put one hand on his ankle, literally guiding his feet to quiet purchase, pushing him, steering him, while dragging the pike with her other hand. He was the strategist, the alpha of the mind. But here, in the physical dark, he was the cub and she was the matriarch. They moved for what felt like an eternity, through a maze of hot, cramped tunnels. The alarms were a constant, maddening backdrop. Jonnel's mind was racing, trying to overlay Velora's crude map with the reality of the turns they were taking. "Left here," he whispered, remembering the schematic. "Should be a T-junction." "I know," she breathed. "I smell the coolant." She smelled it. He was navigating by memory. She was navigating by a whole other sense. They reached the junction. A grated catwalk was below them, lit by the flashing red alarms. 2 troopers ran past, their heavy boots clanging on the metal. Velora pulled him back into the shadows, her body pressing him against the wall. He could feel her heart, a steady, powerful thump against his back. She was not even breathing hard, just annoyed by the pike. "Close," she whispered, her voice in his ear. He felt the soft fur of her ear brush his cheek. Where are the cubs?" he panted. "Soon, this way." She led him up into a vertical shaft. It was a hot, miserable climb, but the sound of the alarms was fainter here. They were in the deep guts of the station, a place no guard would willingly go. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal and engine lubricant. Finally, she stopped. They were in a small insulated junction, a tiny alcove off the main shaft. It was blessedly dark and quiet. "Wait," she whispered. She released him and crept forward. He saw her silhouette, a flash of green skin and silver hair in the gloom. She stopped at a cluster of thick, insulated pipes. In the corner, he could see a steady drip, drip, drip from a leaking coolant recycling pipe into a small puddle. A water source. She made a sound. It was not a word, it was not a growl. It was a soft, trilling chitter, a sound a mother bird might make. A tiny scuffling sound, a small, high-pitched meow? And then, from behind the largest pipe, 2 figures emerged. They were small, no bigger than human toddlers. They were covered in soft teal-green fur, identical to their mother's ears and tail. They had the same sharp feline faces, the same large dark eyes. They were weak, their movements shaky from hunger, but they were alive. They stumbled to her. She didn't make a sound. She just gathered them up, her large hands gentle, and buried her face in their soft fur, her whole body shaking with the force of her relief. The reunion was silent, powerful, and heartbreaking. One of the cubs, a little male, poked his head out. He saw Jonnel, a strange, pale shadow in the dark. He hissed, a tiny, defiant sound. Velora growled, a low, chiding sound. She immediately nudged the cub's head toward Jonnel. Then she did the one thing that cemented his place. She licked the cub's head, and then she licked Jonnel's hand. She was mixing their scents. The cub sniffed Jonnel's hand, his little nose twitching. He smelled his mother. He smelled pack. He relaxed and then tentatively licked Jonnel's finger with a tiny, rough tongue. "We have them," Jonnel breathed, his voice thick. "We go," Velora said, her voice like iron. She was a matriarch again. She nudged the cubs back into their hiding spot. "Wait here, do not move." She looked at Jonnel. "The bay, you get the door." "I get the door," he confirmed. "The final phase." "The den overlooks the bay," Jonnel recited, his mind clicking back into strategist mode. "But how do we get in?" Velora didn't answer. She just led him down a short, dark tube, dragging the pike. She stopped at a heavy mesh grate, the kind used for ventilation. Below them, perhaps 20 feet down, was a small, brightly lit maintenance bay. It was clean, unlike the tunnels, and sitting in the center of it, gleaming under the white lights, was a single, sleek, short-range shuttle. It was a technical craft, used for exterior repairs. It was perfect. The bay was empty. The station-wide alarm meant all non-essential personnel were either locked down or converging on cell block D. "There," Velora pointed. She was indicating the locking mechanism on the grate. It was a simple external maglock. Jonnel studied it. I can't break that," he said. "It's too strong." "Do not break," Velora said. She reached through the grate, her arm extending to its absolute limit. Her black claws clicked against the lock's housing. "Code!" Jonnel looked. It was a simple numerical keypad. "I don't know the code, Velora." "Look," she commanded. He looked closer. The pad was dirty, covered in the same grime as the rest of the station. But 4 of the keys, 1, 4, 7, and 9, were cleaner. He stared, his mind working. "The 9 and the 7 are heavily worn," he whispered, a new theory forming. "The grime is almost gone. The 1 and 4 are just cleaner than the rest." "What does it mean?" she hissed. The sound of distant, organized footsteps was echoing up the shaft. They were being hunted. "They use it all the time," Jonnel said. "They're lazy. It's a location. What's the designation of this station?" "Station 97, Velora answered immediately. Subsector 14. Jonnel's eyes lit up. "That's it. They use the designation 9714. Try it. 974. Velora's claw flashed out 9714. A loud click. The light on the lock turned green. Velora didn't celebrate. She tore the heavy grate from its housing and dropped it to the floor of the bay with a clang. She looked back at Jonnel. "Get the cubs!" He nodded, scrambling back to the den. He found the two small, weak cubs, scooped them up, and carried them to the opening. Velora was already on the bay floor, her hands raised. "Drop them," she ordered. He did one by one. She caught them like they were made of glass, setting them gently on the floor. "Now you," she said. Jonnel looked down. It was a 20-foot drop. "I'll break my legs." "I will catch you," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. He took a breath. He believed her. He sat on the edge, swung his legs over, and let go. He fell, the wind rushing past him. He hit her, and it was not like hitting a person. It was like hitting a high-tension net. Her body absorbed his entire impact, her legs bending, her arms wrapping around him. They went down to one knee, a tangle of green skin, silver hair, and human fear. He was safe. He was on the ground. "The shuttle," he gasped, untangling himself. He ran for the cockpit. Velora herded the cubs inside, shoving them into a small, dark storage locker. "Stay," she commanded. She hauled the heavy shock pike in after them. Jonnel slid into the pilot's chair. The console was dark. He slammed his fist on the activation panel. Nothing. It's dead," he said, panic rising. "The station-wide lock, I can't override it." "Then make it," Velora said, coming up behind him, the pike in her hand. He looked at the console. He was a behaviorist, not a pilot. But he was human. He was an adapter. "The power," he muttered. "It's not locked, it's just disconnected from the main grid. It needs its own power." He saw the auxiliary power coupling, a heavy-duty socket. He looked at the crackling shock pike in her hand. "Velora," he said, his voice urgent. "The pike, give it to me." She handed it to him. At that exact moment, the main bay door, the one leading to the corridor, hissed open. Warden Krell stood there, his uniform singed, his face black with rage. He was flanked by 6 troopers in full combat gear. "You filth," Krell snarled. "You're not escaping. You're just going to die in a nicer room." "Fire!" Krell screamed. The troopers raised their rifles. Jonnel roared in desperation. He jammed the crackling end of the shock pike into the shuttle's auxiliary power coupling. A violent surge of energy threw him back against the chair. The pike sparked, fried, and died. But the console lit up like a star. "Velora!" Jonnel yelled, his fingers flying, initiating the pre-flight sequence. She did not run. She did not hide. She roared. It was the sound of a matriarch defending her young, and she launched herself at the troopers. A green and silver whirlwind. She had no weapon. She was the weapon. She met the first trooper, her claws raking his visor, blinding him. She used his body as a shield as 2 others fired. The pulse blasts hit their comrade, sending him sprawling. "Seal the hatch," Jonnel yelled, his eyes on the power gauges. "Velora, get in!" She was magnificent. She ducked under a rifle butt, grabbed the weapon, and tore it from the trooper's hands. She didn't know how to fire it, so she used it as a club, breaking the man's arm. Krell, staying back, drew his sidearm and fired. The energy blast hit Velora high in the shoulder. She screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure pain, and stumbled. Her green skin sizzled and blackened at the impact site. "Velora!" Jonnel cried, his hand hovering over the hatch control. She fell to one knee, but she was smiling, a bloody, feral grin. She was buying him time. She grabbed a trooper's leg and pulled, toppling him. "Now, Jonnel," she roared, "go!" "I'm not leaving you." He slammed the seal button and leaped from his chair, grabbing her arm. "Thrusters!" he yelled, pulling her bodily into the cockpit. The hatch hissed shut. A moment later, pulse blasts hammered against the exterior hull, the sound a deafening gong. He scrambled back into the pilot's seat, dragging her with him. She collapsed at his feet. He grabbed the yoke. "Hold on." He fired the main engines, a continuous burn. The shuttle shot forward, untethered, and blasted through the maintenance bay doors, which crumpled like paper. They were out. They were in the vast open cargo artery of the station. Jonnel banked hard, scraping the hull, and aimed for the nearest magnetic launch port. Alarms shrieked. He saw 2 Xylos fighters detaching from their moorings. He pushed the engines to their limit, a desperate, full-throttle burn. The shuttle shot out of the launch port, a tiny, stolen ship against the black, star-dusted void. He pushed the engines past the red line, aiming for the nearest asteroid field. The silence of space was sudden, deafening, broken only by the shuttle's straining engines and Velora's harsh, pained breathing. He set the controls to a steady course and ran back to her. She was on the floor, her green skin pale, her blood a dark violet color pooling on the deck. The wounds were bad, cauterized but deep. He ripped open a med kit. "Velora!" She swatted his hand away. She grabbed her own wound, her claws digging into her own flesh, her face a mask of agony. She was treating it, her movements practiced. She was a warrior. She knew how to field dress a plasma burn. He ran to the storage locker and opened it. The two cubs tumbled out, terrified, and immediately ran to their mother, chittering in panic. She nuzzled them, a low, reassuring rumble in her chest, even as she winced in pain. Jonnel went back to the pilot's chair, his hands shaking. He watched the scanner. No pursuit. They were too small, too fast. They were lost in the debris field. They were, for now, safe. He let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest since his capture. He had done it. They had done it. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked. It was Velora. She was wounded. She was bleeding, but she was standing. The cubs were curled up, already asleep, on the co-pilot's chair. She didn't speak. She looked at him, her dark, feline eyes filled with an emotion he could not name. It was gratitude. It was awe. It was possession. She knelt beside the pilot's chair, a mirror of the first day in the cell. She laid her head on his knee, her good ear pressing into his leg. Her long teal tail thumped once, softly on the deck. He stroked her silver hair, his fingers tracing the pointed soft fur of her ear. She, the feral warrior, the cunning matriarch, the predator, she had chosen him. She looked up at him, her gaze raw and unfiltered. He, the soft human, the xeno-behaviorist, the quiet man, he was her alpha, he was her mate, he had saved her pack.